What's going on, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of MMA 101. I'm Andre Wynn, or MMA Dre. Recently, ESPN released a documentary about Bruce Lee and his life, and it's called Be Water. If you haven't already seen that documentary, I highly suggest that you go and watch it right now. It is fantastic. Still, that being said, I do have my gripes with it. It doesn't quite get to the martial arts side of things and the sports side of things, but it is really good. It really does teach you about the background of Asian Americans in America. It helps teach you about social issues that were sort of going on, and then helps show how Bruce Lee became the icon that he is today. But still, again, like I said, I do have my gripes, but I highly suggest that you go and watch it right now if you're a fan of Bruce Lee or martial arts in general. Still, with all the complaints that I do have about the documentary, it still reignites the question, how would Bruce Lee have done in modern mixed martial arts? So, today, we're going to see if we can answer that question. Let's get started. Today's topic is a little bit more theoretical, and obviously there's no right or wrong answer. So I think the best approach is just to list out what are some of the negatives versus some of the positives of Bruce Lee's sort of fighting style and some of his physical attributes that he has, and then we'll sort of compare the two lists and then come to a conclusion at the end. So we're going to go ahead and start with the negatives. First negative that I have is Bruce Lee's focus on speed versus power. This is evident in a lot of Bruce Lee's own quotes. I'm going to be paraphrasing here, but a lot of the things that he says are like, "I'll hit you before you hit me," or "A fight can end in an instant, so why lead with your weak side? Lead with your strong side." And again, those are all paraphrasing, but it just shows the emphasis that Bruce Lee had on speed as opposed to power. Bruce Lee's emphasis on speed is also apparent in a lot of his techniques. Specifically, if you look at his Wing Chun sort of style of punches. So a lot of those punches, they're going to punch with the thumb vertically as opposed to turning the punch over and punching with the thumb going horizontally. Now, when you do that, yes, it makes it a lot quicker. Your hand basically just has to move from point A to point B without putting too much more motion into it. But at the same time, that limits a lot of the power that you can generate from throwing your whole hip in and your shoulders, being able to generate a lot of power that comes from the rest of your body. So again, this is really fast. A lot of Kung Fu styles will use this, specifically Wing Chun, which is the style that Bruce Lee first was taught, but it sacrifices a lot of power when it comes to your actual strikes. Now, there are some times where it's appropriate to leave your thumb pointed up. That specifically comes in the case of hooks. So if I'm throwing like a good body hook, it's okay to leave my thumb pointed up, but I'm creating a structure with my elbow, and I'm still throwing my entire hip and my shoulders into it, as opposed to just going straight out where it's just my arm that's extending and there's no power behind it. Now, I'm not saying that speed isn't important. Speed is always important, especially at the weight classes that Bruce Lee would be fighting at. But let's be honest, in a 15-minute fight, 15 to 25 minutes, you're going to run out of speed fairly quickly. And what's really going to last is that damage that you've done throwing those hard, heavy kicks and hits. Right? So when I'm punching really heavy, that's what'll continue to last throughout the fight, not so much the little taps that I've been given in the first round. And of course, your speed is always going to decrease the further you go into the fight. So yes, you may be really fast and really crisp and clean in the first or second round, but by the time you get to the third round, and then if you're in the championship rounds, fourth round and fifth round, your speed starts to decline significantly. And if that's the only thing that you have, and that's the only advantage you have, then you're really in trouble when you have a guy that also has speed mixed with power. Maybe they're a little bit slower than you, but that power might still carry into those later rounds. For all those reasons, that's my number one negative for Bruce Lee, is his emphasis of speed versus power. Negative number 2 is leading with his dominant side. Now again, that's sort of related to his whole philosophy of I've got to be quicker, right? So I'm going to put my power side forward. He was right-handed, so you'll see in a lot of his stances he'll put his right side forward. Now, I know there's a lot of different philosophies and a lot of different techniques when it comes to fighting, and Bruce Lee's philosophy specifically was a fight might not last that long, so why am I going to leave my power behind me when I could have it up front and I can access that power quickly? That sounds like a pretty valid idea of, hey, if my power is right here, I could access it and get off a really quick hit or a really strong hit right away. But in my opinion, when it comes to actual practice and putting it to use, it actually does the opposite. You're actually limiting the amount of power you're able to generate. Because if you have your dominant side forward, you're no longer able to throw the entire hip and motions into a lot of your strikes. And generally, that's what you want to do with your dominant side, is really get your hip rotation into a lot of those strikes. So now you're limiting the power with your dominant side, and then you're maximizing the power of your weak side. So for me, my left side is always weaker. So yes, I might get a lot of hip rotation in my weak side, but the optimal amount of power or the maximum amount of power that I can generate from my left side, be it a kick or a punch, is always going to be weaker than had I had my right side back and I'm using my right side, twisting my hips, doing that exact same motion of a kick or a punch. So yes, you do have your power a little bit forward, so maybe he generates a little bit more power off his jabs than, say, your typical jab with your left hand, right? Or your, I guess I should call it your weak side forward. But again, you're sort of capping the amount of power that you have overall. And so when you need to really load up and really release a big kick or big hit, you're not able to do so. Not only does leading with your dominant side provide a little bit of offensive issues, it also provides a lot of defensive issues as well. So your lead leg, if that's your power side, that's also going to be a side that a lot of people are going to be kicking. So in MMA, you're going to see tons of leg kicks. And if that's your power side, and that's the side you like to sort of rely on, if that leg starts to go from a lot of repeated leg kicks, whether it be down at the calf or at the quad, or a lot of people call it the oblique kick or that little knee kick, that's going to ultimately diminish that speed advantage that you wanted anyways, and now you've limited your power. So your speed has been reduced because your front leg, your lead leg, has been battered and kicked and bruised throughout the whole fight, and now your power is waning. So you now lack both the speed and power that you had originally thought that you would have, leaving you a lot more vulnerable to other attacks and other strategies. That's my number 2 sort of detriment or negative when it comes to Bruce Lee's fighting style, is leading with your dominant leg. Yes, it seems like it might work, but I think in practicality, it's probably not as effective as he actually thought that it would be. Now, the third negative that I have for Bruce Lee is the lack of experience. I know, it's weird saying that Bruce Lee lacked fighting experience, but hear me out, it's kind of true. We know of a few high-profile sparring matches that Bruce Lee had. I believe he challenged a really well-known Kung Fu master or Taekwondo master, I can't remember which one, back in Asia to a sparring match. And I believe they actually sparred, but we don't actually know the result of what happened in that match. And we don't really know, or we don't really see Bruce Lee spar in too many other matches. I've seen on the internet maybe like 2 or 3, and we know that Bruce didn't really participate in tournaments like Chuck Norris and a lot of other practitioners. And if Bruce Lee isn't participating in sparring matches and tournaments, we definitely know he's not going out and just participating in street fights either. So while yes, Bruce was very dedicated to martial arts, and I'm sure that his martial arts styles could translate very well, we really don't know how he would have operated in an actual fighting environment. Especially when you're in an octagon, there's a lot of people around you, your adrenaline is high, technique and philosophy, it's all good and it's all great in practice, but when you actually get into the octagon and you're actually trying to fight, how well does that translate? We don't really know until you actually get hit. For all those reasons, lack of experience is the third negative that I have for Bruce Lee. Now, for the positives. The first positive is height and reach. Bruce Lee was a shredded 5'7" to 5'8" at 140 pounds. If we assume that he would cut weight like every other MMA fighter, that would probably put him at about 125 or 135. So he'd be fighting probably flyweight. A 15-pound cut really isn't that much, even for a guy as lean as Bruce Lee. But either way, whether he's fighting at flyweight or bantamweight, he's still going to be at least average in bantamweight and probably a little bit above average height and reach when it comes to flyweight. And that, of course, given his speed, given his fighting technique and ability, paired with height and reach, that could allow him to do quite a bit of damage in the octagon. Again, positive number 1, height and reach. Positive number 2 is Bruce's willingness to experiment. Bruce Lee obviously didn't know a lot of the ground fighting techniques that we have today just because BJJ and wrestling, they weren't really all that popular back then. But Bruce still experimented a little bit with judo and a little bit with submissions. This is evident in Game of Death when he kills Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with a bulldog choke, or in Way of the Dragon when he's fighting Chuck Norris and he kills him with a guillotine choke. So that shows that Bruce Lee at least had it in the mind that, hey, you don't have to just beat somebody with strikes, you can beat them in other ways as well. And that was sort of the start to mixed martial arts as we know it, or at least to the submission game, is, hey, I can be a striker as well as mix in some of these submissions, right? And at that time it was mostly chokeholds, but certainly Bruce Lee was willing to experiment with more. We also see that Bruce Lee experimented with tie-ups or wrist control, and then he was also experimenting with hip kicks or knee or oblique kicks, which are actually starting to make a comeback in MMA, or at least starting to be used more widely in MMA by the likes of John Jones, Israel Adesanya, a lot of our other guys that we view as really good strikers. So, while Bruce Lee's technique might have been limited at the time, so yes, if you were just to drop Bruce Lee from back then into today's fighting, of course he's going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage. But if you give him a few years to train in an actual gym with actual MMA coaches, right, or at the very least different coaches of different styles, I guarantee that he'd be willing to put it all together and probably even be creative, that we would start to see his own unique style and possibly even moves that we haven't seen yet in MMA. With all that being said, positive number 2 is Bruce Lee's willingness to experiment. So the final positive that I have listed, and I personally think it's the most important, is Bruce Lee's dedication. Dedication is also one of the hardest things to measure, but we can see that Bruce Lee, he started at the age of 13 learning Wing Chun martial arts, and then he progressed all the way up until 32, the time that he died. So that was almost 20 years of practicing and living martial arts. He was constantly trying to learn and apply new techniques. He was a disciple as well as a teacher of martial arts, and so with that dedication, I think it would have transferred really well. We do see a lot of athletes, they come in maybe after they're 18 or after they've had a college career of some type, right? Whether they're playing football or basketball, soccer, a lot of wrestlers transition, but very rarely do we see pure martial artists going from a young age that have done like striking, I should say, all the way up until they're an adult. And so I think just that dedication and pure desire to want to learn and practice martial arts would have really helped and benefited Bruce Lee in the long run in his MMA career. So again, positive number 3 is Bruce Lee's dedication. When you take into account all of the strengths and weaknesses of Bruce Lee, I think he would have been pretty successful in MMA. He definitely would have had to learn and incorporate new modern techniques to his fighting style. He possibly would have had to change his fighting style completely. But we know that Bruce Lee is the type of guy who's humble enough, who's creative enough and inventive enough, as well as passionate enough to have done that. He would have said, hey, what are the best techniques that I can use? What should I apply? What should I not apply? And honestly, the mantra behind Jeet Kune Do is keep what's useful, get rid of what's not. And so Bruce Lee, I think, really would have taken what worked for him, what would have worked in the octagon, and said, hey, how can I really mold this all together to be the most complete fighter that I can be? My personal opinion, I definitely think Bruce Lee could have competed in modern day martial arts. Would he have been a champion? I don't know, that's hard to say. It takes a lot of work to be a champion of, UFC or 1FC or even Bellator, but I still think Bruce Lee would have been very competitive and definitely would have had a shot at it. Would Bruce Lee have been effective in modern mixed martial arts? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Again, give it a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. I hope you enjoyed these videos, and I've got plenty more coming for you. I'll see you next time.